Jeremy Corbyn, thanks for joining us.
Look at where we are.
We are here in the Emirates Stadium, home of your beloved Arsenal. Your seat around here somewhere?
Over there.
Over there. You support any other football teams?
Yes. As a kid, I supported Wolves because I grew up near Wolves. So we used to support Wolverhampton Wanderers. Mm-hmm. Black and old gold colours. Great atmosphere. This was in the 60s. Mm-hmm. And then I moved to London, and now I live near the Arsenal Stadium, so Arsenal is the home team. But I also have a love and admiration for FGR, Forest Green Rovers. Forest Green Rovers now top of League 2. I like Forest Green Rovers. They're a vegan team with a wooden stadium, and Dale Vince, as the owner, runs around on electric motorbikes, and the players all drive electric cars. He does run Ecotricity, so it kind of makes sense.
Topical as well, because Extinction Rebellion at the moment, protesting in London.
Absolutely.
Do they have your support, and particularly as well their actions that are causing quite a significant amount of disruption to ordinary people?
I think they need to be slightly cautious sometimes of disrupting public transport, which they're not, generally speaking, this time. Last time they did. But I do think we've got to recognise that an awful lot of people have mobilised themselves about the issues of climate change, and that has changed the political debate. And so when the big day of action took place, I was with a lot of school children outside my town hall, Islington Town Hall, and I spoke at the demonstration in Parliament Square later on that day. So I do think it has changed the debate in this country and all around the world, and people began to realise you cannot go on polluting the planet at the rate we are, and you have to start changing things around, or more rapidly change things. So I'm supportive.
So we're here today because of the charity Show Racism, the Red Card. To what extent do you think the terraces, football stands, have allowed racism to develop amongst them?
I think over a long period, racism has gone down at football matches. I remember going to football matches in the 60s and 70s, and the racist remarks against black players was then the norm, and there were actually very few black players. And there were black players that played West Ham and other clubs, Clyde Best and others, got the most appalling abuse on the pitch, throwing bananas at them, making monkey noises, all this kind of racist rubbish. And since the anti-racist campaigns have gained strength since the 1970s onwards, the level of racism on the terraces has gone down a great deal. I remember sitting over there, the other side of the stadium, with a group of very exuberant Arsenal supporters. One started making a lot of racist remarks about various players. Nobody joined in and supported him. Others told him to shut up. And a steward came and just sat next to him and said, "What are you talking about?" And then she, and it was a woman, then said, "Can you come with me?" He said, "Where are we going?" She said, "Well, you're going out of the stadium. I'm going back to my office." And took him out. Which it shows that clubs don't tolerate it at all. And I think that's absolutely right. But it's got to also go further into international matches. And I think that the England team are quite right. If racist abuse starts on in any international match against any player, then the team should just say, "We're not having it, we're walking off the pitch." Russia managed to have a zero tolerance of racism during the World Cup. Well done. That should be the norm.
So for context, Harry Kane, Tammy Abraham, they've been talking this week about when England go to Bulgaria on Monday, that if there is any racist chanting, Harry Kane, the captain of England, has said he would support his black players and the whole team will leave the field.
Well done, Harry Kane. Absolutely spot on and right. It's the only reaction you can give. You just do not tolerate racism in any form.
That decision is actually in breach with UEFA's own protocols. They have a 3-step process. So they ask kindly over the PA for people to stop being racist. Then the next step is for them to temporarily suspend the game for 10 minutes. And then after that, if it still continues, they'll withdraw the game. It's over, it's abandoned. Do you think that's too timid?
It's a bit timid. I think they should be on it from the very beginning and announce at the start of the game, we will not tolerate any form of racist or homophobic abuse being thrown at any players during the match. And I think Harry Kane is right to speak out on this, and I fully support him.
How culpable do you think the media are in this?
Sometimes they report it, sometimes they don't, sometimes they analyse it, other times they don't. I think they need to be saying, look, we are part of a campaign to kick racism out of sport altogether, because the effect on a player of getting constant racist abuse is huge. But also, what's that saying to a young girl or boy who's interested in football, who wants to play football, young black girl, Indian girl, young black boy, Indian girl, Indian boy? They're going to say, oh, I'm not sure I want to get involved in that. You've got to make football a racism-free zone, as with every other sport.
Raheem Sterling's drawn attention to it, hasn't he? Because he himself actually was on the receiving end of some racist abuse at the Chelsea ground. 4 fans ejected, charged, banned. He's drawn attention to the way that the press has covered, I think it was a couple of Manchester City players buying homes for their mums. One, a young black man, he was, splashing the cash, his expensive home, etc. And then Phil Foden, the other player, he was applauded for being, a starlet helping his mum out.
Raheem Sterling is spot on that. The young black guy with a lot of money buys a home for his mum. It's, hey, what's going on? What's this about? Young white guy buys a home for his mum. Good boy. Well, sorry, they're both good boys.
Full stop. Do you think people are going to struggle to take the Labour Party seriously on this racism issue? You've been a lifelong anti-racism campaigner all your life. A lot in the media accuse the Labour Party at the moment of not being an anti-racist campaigner. What do you say to those people?
The Labour Party is a totally anti-racist party and organisation. It was a Labour government in the 1960s that introduced the first race relations legislation into Britain. It was a Labour government that set up the Commission on Racial Equality. It's the Labour Party that has opposed racism at all times in our society. I've spent my life as an anti-racist campaigner from the 1960s in the Midlands right through to today. I will never tolerate racism in any shape or form in our society, our party or our community.
Another problem in the English game that you mentioned recently is Mike Ashley, the owner of Newcastle. Why is it that you criticised him?
He owns the club, has not obviously invested much money in the club. The club has an amazingly passionate group of supporters who feel that their owner is holding the club back and letting them down. And I was in Newcastle last weekend and I met the supporters, some of whom were boycotting matches, and they gave me a shirt for Toon Aid, which is Newcastle United supporters who are raising money for food banks and for aid to refugees all around the world. And they're absolutely passionate about their club. And I was able then to talk about our policies on football, which are about clubs having to have 2 supporters elected to the board of directors of the club, about money that will be paid by the Premiership clubs into a football fund to support grassroots football, because grassroots football is really up against it, often dying, in many cases pitches being sold off. If we're to have a vibrant football community in Britain, then some of the riches of the Premiership clubs must be shared further down the line. And so football is not just a business. Football is something very difficult, very hard to define. It's a passion, it's a community, it's a sport. At one level, like all sport, it's not completely logical, but then another level, it is totally logical. It's a place where people come together. We're at the Arsenal today. I remember taking my kids to Arsenal as very young children, and we sat there on the front row in the old Highbury Stadium, and they had this sense of wow, of wonderment that you could get in those days 40,000 people in the same place following with passion a match. And so there is that sort of sense of community experience. And so those that invest in football, they should understand that football is about people's lives, community, hopes and dreams.
It's almost like Ashley's approach to Newcastle, for example, Sports Direct getting heavily discounted advertising at the ground. What is it about him that drew your criticism specifically?
That I don't believe he's invested properly in the club, and I am very critical of Sports Direct as an employer and the way in which they employ people, often on 0 hours contracts and some very bad work conditions, and the way they strongly opposed their employees joining trade unions. And so I think he is an example, and I've made him an example in what I said. But I just say this, I love football in the community. I like what this club Arsenal does in the community, and I think that's amazing and that's great, and their support for a refugee football team locally. And so I just say to those that are investing in football, think about it a moment. You're actually are you really investing in football, or are you just trying to make money out of it? Think about it.
You mentioned there as well, Tunaid, a group who are doing a little bit of food bank work around their club. There's a group, Fans Supporting Food Banks, who I think it's a cross-club venture actually between Liverpool and Everton, doing collections at the turnstile, distributing food around. It demonstrates that football fans can be a force for good.
Oh, football fans absolutely can be a force for good, and that's actually always been the case, that football fans do give money to charity. And I remember going to matches many years ago as a kid. You would never dare do it these days. They used to walk around the pitch at half time with about 6 blokes holding an enormous blanket, and the idea was you threw money to land in the blanket and they would collect money for a charity. I mean, yeah, you wouldn't get it, nobody would get anywhere near that these days. But that sense of community is a very important one, and every match day outside this stadium, like all the others, there's collecting for different charities. And I went to the Liverpool Food Bank at Anfield, and I think it's fantastic what they do. And also Liverpool and Everton doing it together is great. Lots of clubs do it, and the Crystal Palace game is going to be apparently a big collection for Food Bank here.
One thing that we must talk about, as we always must, is Brexit. Yeah. Tell me how damaging you think a no-deal exit from the European Union will be for this country.
A no-deal exit will be really, really damaging to this country, because it will mean we go straight on to World Trade Organization rules, which will mean tariffs, which will mean a loss of export market straight away into Europe for Nissan and everybody else. It will mean a disruption of medicine supplies. It will mean inspections of goods at cross-border places such as Dover, Felixstowe and all the others. And seriously, it will mean problems in Northern Ireland, where the Good Friday Agreement is an international treaty. It's not a bilateral agreement, it's an international treaty, and it will mean some form of border control has to come in. And I think we all know the history of border controls in Northern Ireland. So a no-deal Brexit has got to be taken absolutely off the table, which is why my party, Labour, supported the legislation that was introduced from the backbenches by Hilary Benn, which is the EU No. 2 Act, which requires the Prime Minister to sign by the 19th of October, Saturday week, that Britain will seek an extension to our membership in order to negotiate something more sensible. During the referendum campaign, both Boris Johnson and Michael Gove said a no-deal exit would be a very dangerous path for Britain. Here they are now, actually happily countenancing just such a thing happening. We'll do everything we can to stop a no-deal exit.
So the EU today said they're optimistic after talks between Leo Varadkar and Boris Johnson yesterday. Is there a deal that the Prime Minister could bring to the Parliament that you would support, the Labour Party would support?
What we put forward, the Labour Party put forward, is what we call the 5 pillars, which are a customs union with the European Union, is access to European markets through a relationship with the single market, and protection of environmental standards, workers' rights and consumer standards, and absolutely protection of the Good Friday Agreement. We have put that to Parliament. It got a good vote, just under 300. It did very well, but it wasn't quite enough to win it, and that is the position that we're sticking to. And a Labour government would, if elected, negotiate within 3 months an agreement with the European Union. We've every belief we could do that, and then put that to a referendum alongside Remain and I think some reforms to the European Union. But we've got to bring people together. Communities that voted leave for lots of reasons, some of which were they'd received no investment, nothing for a very long time, left behind communities. We've got to look at the levels of poverty in Britain, the levels of inequality in Britain, but also the issues of regional inequality, which are probably greater in Britain than almost any other European country. But having said that, there are areas in northern France, there are areas in eastern Germany that feel just as left behind as parts of Britain.
If that wasn't on the table, a Labour deal wasn't on the table, if you're serious about blocking no deal, could you stomach it? Could you support something? Because surely that's the best way. If you don't want no deal, swallow your pride, take what Boris Johnson brings back, and we've got an agreement.
Well, we would then keep on trying to amend that, but I do think any deal that undermines the Good Friday Agreement and any deal that damages jobs in this country by going on to WTO rules is automatically a bad deal. We'll fight this thing all the way. I'm very determined to prevent a no-deal exit from the EU.
Did you see Tony Blair's interview with Andrew Neil this week?
No, I didn't.
So the reason I ask is he was quite vague about whether he thought a government under your leadership, a Labour leadership, would be worse for the country than a no-deal Brexit. What do you think about that?
I lead the Labour Party, and I'm proud to lead the Labour Party, and I'm proud that we've become a party that's opposed to austerity, a party of redistribution of wealth and power in our society, and a party absolutely dedicated to improving the lives of everyone in this country, particularly the poorest people, by giving young people hope that they won't go into debt because they want an education, hope that they'll get the apprenticeship they need and the job that they need. I'm very proud to do that, and I'll be very proud on the international stage to lead a government that is dedicated to peace, justice, democracy and human rights all around the world.
It must sting a little bit, though, to hear Labour's last elected Prime Minister say that about you.
I would hope that all members of the Labour Party would recognise the responsibility to fight this government and all the damage it's done to the lives of the poorest people in this country, the growth of poverty and food banks, and recognise that our manifesto, our programme, is one that will transform the lives of people. And I urge everyone, get behind that programme and elect a Labour government.
On the subject of Tony Blair, there's fresh conflict in the Middle East this week. Turkey has invaded northeastern Syria, Kurdish lands. We've seen airstrikes, artillery, civilian casualties. Would the Labour Party support sanctions against Turkey to stop that action taking place?
Yes, we would go straight away to the UN, which has partly happened, to demand a ceasefire. And I think in the event of no ceasefire, then you have to start talking about what economic and other actions one would take against the Turkish government to stop this. The reality is a peace process within the region, a peace process that brings about a ceasefire in Syria, has to recognise the multiplicity of complexities, if you like, of the Syrian state, but also the rights of Kurdish people, which have been denied ever since the end of the First World War, not just in Syria, but also in Turkey. And as one who represents a community where there are many Kurdish people, I just feel so sad and so angry about the way the Kurdish people are now being treated. They deserve to be able to live in peace with their identity as Kurdish people. And surely that isn't too much to ask in the 21st century.
Because they're a beacon of secular democracy in what is otherwise a swamp of dictators. They should be our allies, shouldn't they?
Well, every country could be our allies who are going to support the ideas of peace, democracy and the multiplicity of that society, the diversity of that society. And I think that the behaviour of Turkey in invading the Kurdish area in the north is absolutely appalling.
Would the Labour Party consider implementing a no-fly zone or committing the British Armed Forces
What
to the
we
area?
would do is work through the United Nations to bring about a ceasefire, and I think it's at that point there has to be a multilateral approach to it. And that means bringing together Russia with the European Union and obviously through the UN Security Council. Let's not get involved in another war. Let's get involved in peace.
Jeremy Corbyn, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.